All right, good evening. It is Wednesday, February 7th, and this is the Education Committee meeting. With me are the committee members, Mr. Warschauer, Dr. Thomas, and Mr. Held, our newest addition to our committee. So welcome to committee members and also fellow board members. I know Ms. Evans, Jenna Evans, is joining us remotely. And everybody else is here, and Mr. Sirota is not, right? Yeah. All right, so welcome, and yeah, just for those of you in attendance or at home, we are now at the second half of the school year. Those of you who were involved in midterms and other activities will probably realize that. It's amazing how fast the year goes. Lots of stuff going on in the district, so we'll be talking more about that in a moment. So let's get going. Mr. Hoffman, any announcements?
Good evening. Yes, three very brief announcements. More information on each of these can be found both on the website and in our building newsletters and our upcoming news from the Nest. Be on the lookout about information regarding the third annual Upper Dublin Summer STEM Academy, which will be held for 2 weeks in July 8th, the week of, and July 15th. Another opportunity for our community. We're very grateful to share that the Upper Dublin Education Foundation will be sponsoring a series of interactive grade level student assemblies on the topic of social media safety at both Sandy Run Middle School and Upper Dublin High School at the end of the month, thanks to a generous gift to the foundation. A highlight of that will be that there's also a parent presentation at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, February 29th in the forum room here at the high school. The parent session is intended for adults and will focus on how to protect families from social media related dangers. More information on the session or to register will be on the UDEF webpage or in our weekly communication. Finally, exciting is kindergarten and new student registration is officially open. All of that information is posted on the main page of our website, and amazingly have to share that we will be welcoming the class of 2037 to Upper Dublin with this upcoming kindergarten class. So that's amazing, and that's all for this evening.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hoffman. And that gets us to the minutes of the January meeting. Members of the committee, did you have a chance to see the minutes? Yes, any updates, changes? No? All right, then we'll move those minutes on to the legislative agenda for information purposes. That then gets us to our presentation, tonight's presentation. I think Dr. Smith is starting that off. Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Ms. Sherbier. So let's see if I can work this correctly, because I always go wrong. So tonight I wanted to just give some legal updates to the Education Committee, and this one particularly pertains to the instructional time requirements for public schools. Oh, there we go. So Act 56 of 2023 was recently passed and has been implemented. This was formerly House Bill 1507. And you can see in the language there, basically, previously, school districts were required to have 180 days of instruction per year, as well as either 990 hours of instructional time at the secondary level, which is grades 7 through 12, or 900 hours at the elementary level, grades K through 5. It was an and just to clarify, the number of instructional days is either days where students are in session or days that you apply to the state to be called Act 80 days, which are professional development days. Both of those count towards the 180. The Act 56 of 2023 changes that to have an or in between there instead of an and, which doesn't seem like a big change, but it actually is a big change in that you don't now need to meet both of those. You can meet one or the other and have met the instructional time requirements according to PDE. So it just prompted some questions or thoughts. So to give you some information on the board did approve the 24-25 instructional calendar, I believe last month. So I've done, with Mr. Hoffman's help, the calculations of each of these requirements. So the 180 days required, our calendar does have 179 days when students are in session and 4 Act 80 days for a total of 183. So we do meet that requirement. The elementary hours, counting those up, as you can see there in K-5, we have 949, and in 6th grade, 1,021. In the box on the lower right, I tried to explain to you how do we count instructional minutes? And the state tells us what is to be considered instructional and what isn't. So it is from the start of your school day to the end of your school day. However, it excludes time for them to eat lunch. It excludes any recess time and any transition times that you might have. So if we build in, 3 minutes for kids to pass in the hallways between classes, we have to exclude that time from our count. So we have done an entire calculation, including all of our full days, our half days, and that's how we got to these numbers. And then our secondary in grades 7 to 12, you can see we're at 1,019. So we meet all 3 of those requirements, even though it is now an or. We meet it both ways for what you have already approved. So the reason that I brought it tonight was to make sure that you understood that legislation has changed and to just think about and start a conversation possibly on implications to that change that maybe we do or maybe we don't want to consider, whether for next year or for future years, and certainly we can revisit this every year. Again, total number of days in the school calendar, we have 183, again, when you count the Act 80 and the student days, or we could consider adjusting that. We certainly want to think about any implications to teaching and learning should we reduce that number of days, and Mr. Hoffman's prepared to share about that if you'd like to hear more. Certainly, we have employee agreements that dictate the number of days that certain employee groups work, and regardless of if we make a change to the instructional calendar, we still need to uphold those. So I'll give you the example. Let's say the board should entertain, okay, we're going to go down to 180 days. Those 3 days, we would still need to have our staff here doing something because our agreement with UDEA indicates a certain number of days. Most likely that would turn into professional development. And again, Mr. Hoffman has, we've talked through some of that and we can speak to that if necessary. The other piece is really the impact on inclement weather days. And you'll notice, and I did pull calendars, Brooke helped me pull calendars from a lot of the districts around the area. What do they do with inclement weather? And many schools build them into the calendar at the end of the year, as we have an extra 3 built into our calendar, but they also then back them off if you don't use them. So past several years, we have not used inclement weather days, and then they adjust where the last day of school is, and students actually get out earlier, maybe by 3 days or whatever that number happens to be. My understanding, and certainly you've all been here a little longer than I have, is that we stick to the 183 days if we don't use any of them for snow. So again, something we could consider identifying on our calendar if we would want to. So again, I'm really bringing it to hear some of your thoughts, maybe some of your questions, and if you would want us to prepare and present to you maybe some slight changes to next year's calendar. If you just want to kind of say, hey, we approved it, let's hold off until the following year, see what some other schools do. I think a lot of schools are talking about it right now. I'm not sure that anybody's out of the gate made any significant changes. I did throw this slide in. Mr. Hoffman and I have been talking the last couple of days, and I know this is probably not in board docs. I'll make sure that it gets added there. Is a recommendation, if you do want to entertain considering something, this is what we would recommend, is that we look at having the total number of days between Act 80 and student days be 180. So we would reduce by 3, and that would, if we wanted to leave the Act 80 days at 4, we would then be reducing the student days by those 3 from 179 to 176. We could play with that. We could do 177 student days and have 3 Act 80 days. Like, we could play with that. But recommending to reduce to 180. Now, I would still suggest you mark on the calendar 183 days, but you mark the last 3 days as inclement weather makeup, and that if we don't use them, we then get out a little bit earlier. If we do use them, parents have already planned, they marked it on their calendar. Hey, I'm not going to take vacation on these days yet, to wait to see if we need weather. The elementary, oops, the wrong way. The elementary and the secondary hours there, I gave that for you in that scenario. If we go down to the 176 student days and 4 Act 80s, we still meet the 900 and the 990 hours in that scenario. So we actually would still be meeting both requirements, even though it's an or. So again, just giving you somewhat of a recommendation. If you want to make a slight adjustment for next year, we could. I put the little graduation cap there because I assume some of you are going to, well, what does that mean for graduation? I did talk to Mr. Schultz and the high school administrative team, and he actually shared with me that prior to 2021, graduation was on the Monday prior to the last day of school. And since then, though, it has fluctuated wherever the last day of school has fallen. His recommendation with his team is that we actually move back to a model like that, where it's set on where it is, regardless of if that last day of school changes. Maybe it's always the first Monday in June, or as he said, the Monday prior to the last day. We could talk about where that would fall. He indicated that that would also give a little bit of space between allowing time for a rain date, making high school graduation not move away a little bit from when we have elementary and middle school promotion assemblies on those last days, that it's not such a heavy day, as well as any underclassmen final exams. So the recommendation, if we move in a different direction, would be to set it at a certain standard time that we would stick with. And again, put that on the calendar. You do run the risk of, if it doesn't fluctuate, if your hours for your 12th graders, a lot of school districts, when they set that date and you had to meet the 180-day requirement, if your seniors, let's say, only had 179 days, there was a slight financial penalty to the district for that. Many districts have eaten those costs per se. In this scenario, though, you can see we have somewhat room if that were to happen with our seniors. So just again, I'm throwing it out there. I wanted you to know legislation changed. We don't have to do anything. I wanted you to see some things we could do if you want to consider anything. So we're just really looking for some conversation, what your questions are, what your ideas might be, and if you want us to bring anything back to you next month to a legislative meeting, or have more conversation, or just wait a year.
All right, thank you, Dr. Smith. I think this is certainly something that is fairly new to most of us on the board. We may not have had a lot of opportunity to look into this. So I'm going to ask if there are any questions, sort of big picture questions. And I would request that if people have had a little more time to think about it, that they communicate that with the administration, so that that gives an opportunity to maybe think about this a little bit more in some more detail. But are there any big picture questions at this point? Mr. Held?
I hope this is a big picture question. So if we were to consider revising the calendar for next year, not advocating one direction or the other, when would that decision need to be made by? Is there a sort of point of no return for that kind of decision?
Certainly, again, somebody who maybe has been here longer can say the history. Typically, districts are approving those in January or February. I have seen slight changes, where a district might in April make a quick revision to a certain date here or there. So I think a smaller revision we could do in the next month or two. I wouldn't after the March meeting suggest any changes at that point. I think families start to look and they're planning their things for the future, or looking when their child might be graduating, all of that. A slight change I could see happening at February or March legislative, but I wouldn't recommend, but I defer to the board in terms of what the community has expected in the past.
Dr. Thomas?
It doesn't sound like you're proposing this, but I always advocate against inserting those random days that are hard for families to cover with younger kids. in terms of adding early dismissals or PD days.
Yeah, we are not recommending that in this time. I do think there is an opportunity for the 25-26 calendar for us to think about different changes that we could make or rearrange where things were.
Ms. Dorshaw?
Yeah, this is not so much a question as it is a comment, and I think if I'm inferring this, it sounds like this is the intention. But I think when in the implications to consider slide, the impacts to teaching and learning, I think would be primary, in which case I would want to make sure that we consult administrators and staff, which to me bears more time for deliberation, just thinking about what would be the potential impacts, and I would advise against making any change in the short term.
Mr. Hoffman, do you want to share just preliminarily, we did talk a little bit about teaching and learning and what professional development could look like should you be inclined to make a change for next year?
So the ongoing work, as you all approved earlier this school year, the EduPlanet software, I think is the word, Prakash, that it's our curriculum management system. And so part of the work that we're doing right now is really looking at all of our course development K-12. I don't think any teacher really plans out every course considering 183 days, or at the high school, half of those days. I don't know that we get that laser specific because, in the past when we've had 183 and those first 3 snow days happen, we still manage to get through all of our essential learning. I think we would absolutely have a much better understanding of the impact of that after we continue this curriculum work and looking at that piece. In terms of adding days at the end of the year, should we make any changes in having that professional development time? I mean, that's always the time that we can get a head start on some of that summer curriculum writing work and curriculum revision that we do, the new course development. So certainly it would be something that we could utilize should the recommendation be made for that.
And I would just add that I did reach out to our UDEA leadership, so they are aware that I would be at least presenting this topic tonight, and I did let them know that I would want to engage with them and seek some of their feedback as well. So I can do some of that if the board is interested in even, considering some changes. If at this point you feel like let's just leave it as it is and maybe we revisit it for 25, 26, that's fine as well. But I certainly would intend to engage with them.
Yeah, Ms. Evans, did you have? No.
I actually do have a question. So, and again, I'm in the same camp. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but just to throw out there a question, does this present any opportunity to adjust start times? I know that's a topic that comes up from time to time.
Start times in terms of school start times on the day, or are you talking about the day we start school?
The actual time of day that school starts.
So I wouldn't be recommending that right now for next year. I think there's a lot of work that would go into that, but you are absolutely right, Ms. Evans. There are districts, I have heard of some in the western part of the state that are getting a little out there in terms of their thinking about 4 days of school a week and having a longer day or shortening days and going longer into June. I think it does open up a lot of possibilities to think outside of the box. I do not know of any district in Montgomery County that is thinking about those types of changes at this time.
Advocating to rush into that by any stretch of the imagination. It struck me that, yeah, it does present some opportunity. And again, I don't know how I feel about it, but okay. Good.
Yeah, so hearing the initial reactions, yes, Dr. Thomas.
I was just curious what the perceived advantage of shortening the school year, other than possibly more PD, like what the rationale would be for that.
I think, in terms of certainly professional development is always a need and we can always use more, but it has to be used meaningfully. I do think we have quite a few professional development days already built into our calendar. I think, part of it is there is always the question of what happens on inclement weather days. So we plan for 183. We know that if we use 3 of them, we still have our 180 and we're good. It's just maybe looking at it a different way. You plan for 180, you block these last 3 on if you need them, you use them. If you don't, you don't. So in a typical year, I think probably 3 was the average days that districts were using for snow. And now the past couple of years, we're really not been using many of them. This year so far, we've had 2. So I can certainly think about that a little bit more, but I think it's just a flip in looking at the way that you do that.
All right. My personal inclination would be to say hold the calendar as is for at least the coming year. Use the coming year to keep this potential in mind and see really what implications it could have. The one suggestion I might want to lobby for or encourage is to look again, and I've suggested this in the past when the original calendar was presented, to make graduation on the 9th, so that last week of school that the seniors will be done on the 9th, and that there is time for staff and everybody else to finish out the year in the next couple of days. That would be my personal recommendation. Maybe it is because that's how we've done it in the past, but I also think it's hard for seniors those last few weeks. It's already like, well, when can it be done? And at the same time, it's a huge opportunity to recognize them as a community and to give them their time of recognition without it being rushed with other things. So perhaps what we could do at this point is to say that we recommend that we leave it as is, perhaps with that June 9th graduation as an option to consider. Then to give board members an opportunity to think this through, present potential scenarios or ask more questions. If they come up, that you have an opportunity to address those. And then at the legislative meeting, we could identify that or put it on for the March meeting at the Education Committee.
That sounds fine to me, Mr. Sherpier. I will put some things in our director's briefing and give you some of the background, maybe the calendars from other schools, just so you can see, and then certainly share your feedback. We can talk about that graduation date suggestion. I can talk to high school administration, and we can communicate and see if February or March you want to discuss at least that change. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate.
Is everybody on the committee okay with that? Yes. All right. Then.
Thank you.
Ms. Redding.
I do think that it gives the executive staff here at Upper Dublin an opportunity to be creative and think outside the box and kind of play with the new format. So when that March meeting does come around, I'd be really curious to see what ideas Mr. Hoffman and Dr. Smith have in terms of what that could possibly look like. As they continue to explore, maybe we're not doing any changes this year, but what are the possibilities and what are the districts doing on the west side of the state that could possibly work here? Not saying that we're gonna push the bar too far, but at least let's expand what's possible with that or being in between, being added to the legislature. So that's all I would ask is for the executive staff to really think about what possibilities are out there as you guys begin to explore what's possible. That's it.
Be happy to do that. Thank you for the guidance.
All right. Then let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which are the conferences. Mr. Hoffman, anything on the conferences?
No, these are school safety, 2 special education, the annual PDE conference for special education, and a coaches convention for one of our high school coaches.
Yes. Any questions? Then committee members, are we okay to move this on to the legislative meeting for approval?
Yes.
Yes, I see yes, so then let's do that. And that gets us then to the student activities. And there are 2, that is the boys lacrosse and the Ripken experience for the baseball team. Any other information?
Both of these would typically not be something, if it were a local trip, that we would be bringing to the board because of the cost. The first has no cost to the district. The second is just the cost of the substitute. But because they're over, I think it's 100 miles per board policy, we do need to ask board for permission for those.
Yes, and I think the Ripken one, that is during a school time, right? That's not a weekend, that's missed, that's excused
Right, yes.
absence. All right. Any questions from committee members or the board? No? Are we okay moving that on to the legislative? Yes. All right, we'll do that. That gets us to public participation. If there's anybody who wants to speak, please come up to the microphone, state where in the district you reside. Not seeing anybody. Also, then we'll close public participation. We did not receive any comments online, so at this point we'll move forward, and that gets me then to the information for the next meeting that will be on Wednesday, March 6th. I expect that we'll see some data there, and especially as we are just past that midpoint of the year. And if needed, we'll come back to the calendar part as well. So thank you for your attention, and we'll take a short break, and then we'll move on to the policy meeting. And with that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Good night.